Hello everyone, this is Reza and welcome to the second part of Rigging for Beginners series. In this video, we're gonna pick up where we left off in the first video and we're gonna skin the skeleton to the geometry. Now, if you're new to rigging, I found starting with skinning much easier. Once we have the base skeleton in place, we can start test our deformations, and if you notice something is slightly off, it is much easier and faster to adjust any joints that would need to be fixed now than if we waited until we added more controls and more constraints to lock these joints down. So with that said, let's go and get the character bound and let's test every joint and make sure we like the result. And if there's a tweak that needs to be made, it's much easier to do it now. To bind the character, obviously we need to select the skeleton and shift select the geometry. So I'm going to go to select by name and search for JNT underscore, and you can use asterisk, and that selects every single joint in the model. I'm going to hold down shift, click on the skeleton folder to reveal every single joint, and from here we're going to hold down control and deselect all the joints with suffix end in the naming convention, simply because we don't want to have redundant influence on those end joints. We don't want to skin those end joints. We just want to target the actual bones and joints to make the geometry move. So I'm just going to go ahead and with the control key held down, I'm going to deselect all the end joints in my list. All right, now let's go ahead and shift select the character and go to skin, bind skin, and let's have a look at this very important bind skin option. Now I'm going to reset the settings so my settings matches yours. Now the first one is bind to, and that specifies whether to bind to an entire skeleton or to only selected joints. Obviously, because we've selected the joints here, we're going to go selected joints. Otherwise, if you set it to joint hierarchy or object hierarchy, it's going to include all the end joints as well. We don't want that. Now, bind method is the one that evolved over time, and we have two really good settings for bind method. The first one is heat map. So if I go to heat map, and that uses a method called heat diffusion, and that technique distributes influence weights evenly into all the neighboring vertices around each joint. So this method works really well if you have a simple error-free model, and it's much faster than any other methods, and I tend to use that quite often. However, the downside is if you have polymodeling error in your geometry, then this method will be the slowest method and your scene will dramatically slow down. So if you want to use this, you need to make sure that your object is very clean. There is no stray vertices, there is no non-manifold geometry, there is no n-gon. Otherwise, this method kind of backfires on you. And the most recent, I would say, binding method is geodesic. And geodesic uses a voxel representation of the mesh to help the calculation. So this is what Maya calls, or Autodesk calls, the new generation of binding method, and it calls the rest of the binding methods legacy bind methods. Now, these two, closest distance and closest hierarchy, unless you want to have one-to-one binding method, that like what we did for the eye or for the hair, if you want to apply them to receive or create soft deformation for the geometry, it requires a lot of tweaking because they come with artifacts, especially for smooth skinning deformation. So if you want to just one object to follow a joint, then that's no problem. You can set it to closest distance or closest in hierarchy, but to rig the entire character, we just stay with these two. For now, I'm just going to select geodesic because it is the most accurate. Now for skinning method, we have three types: classic, dual quaternion, and weight blended. Now classic linear is the traditional smooth skinning where it is very straightforward. All the vertices around the joint are going to follow the joint, but sometimes around the wrist or elbow, this method can result in what Autodesk calls candy wrapper effect, where the mesh loses volume and caves in. And now the dual quaternion is designed to eliminate those undesirable deformation effects. But the problem with dual quaternion is it preserves the volume sometimes too much. When you try to twist the joint, you have to just work with skinning weight. It just doesn't follow the geometry. Now normalize weight, we set it to interactive. And weight distribution, I found neighbors works much better. This prevents the vertices from getting weights to every single joint in the skeleton, which is a very common problem. So I found that having the weight distribution to neighbors is going to help. Now max influence to 5 is usually a very high number, especially for a simple, super simple skeleton that we have. So I'm going to set it to 3. I might actually go to classic linear, and I don't have a major, very complex rig, so actually I can get away with classic linear here. So with that, I'm just going to shift select the character and I'm going to go bind skin. Going to collapse the skeleton, select the IK handle, and let's have a look. Well, not too bad at all. I mean, we do need to work on the upper body and chest a little. I'm gonna undo, but all in all, it's not too bad. Let's look at it from the top view. I select the IK handle. Yes, the forearm deforms, but that's no problem at all. I'm going to select the IK handle for the leg. We need a little bit of work. We need to get some work done around the shin area, but that's fine. Also, we are going to just work on one side. Once it's done, we mirror our weights and all the values to the other side. So I'm going to work with the positive X area, so that area, the left leg and the left arm. Obviously for the torso, once we mirror the values, we need to get some work done, but for now let's just use some of the tools that we have and see what we get. We may not even need to tweak any values once we mirror our weights. So a few tools I would like to put in my shelf right off the bat. One is in general editor, it's component editor. I'm just going to hold down Control Shift click. In skin, I'm going to add hammer skin, and of course I'm going to include paint skin weight. And remember, because this is now bound to the mesh, if you want to move the joint, you just can't do it right now. But there is a really nifty tool in here. It says move skin joint, where it allows you to actually move the joint to the area that you want if you feel like that's needed. For now, I'm just going to leave it as is, move it back. But just so you know, this tool does exist. If you want to use this tool for the arms or the legs, you just need to remove the IK handle, because IK handles lock the position of the joints. So let's go ahead and start with our skin. Let's make sure Auto key is on. I'm going to go to channel box, go to frame 1, select the IK handle, and go Shift W to add keyframe to your translate values. Move to frame 10, W to select the move tool, bring the arm down, and it will insert a keyframe. So we do have this movement, and we can just stay in frame 10 and fix the deformation here. Once it's done, definitely make sure to get rid of these keyframes. You do not want to have any keyframes on the IK handle once we fix the skin. All right, let's go in. And definitely we need to work on the influence on these areas. Now the way I do it, I usually start with component editor, and then gradually but surely I use paint weight tool and hammer skin weight tool to polish the work. First things first, make sure you're not in 3 mode. I switch back to 1 mode. The reason I'm doing this because every point that I paint on, the position of it will change as soon as you switch back to 3. So it would be less accurate when you paint if you're in smooth mode. Now I'm going to select few of these loops. Now think about, for example, this loop right here. And in here, I can just simply control right click and convert my selection to vertices. Now let's go ahead and open component editor, which is absolutely fantastic tool to be very accurate with our points and the way that they receive influence from the bones. Now if I go to smooth skin, these are the points that I have selected, and they receive influence from back, chest, clavicle, shoulder, but also they receive influence from neck and the right clavicle, right shoulder. We really don't need these points to receive any influence from clavicle for now. And we can even go ahead and add those manually. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove any influence that these bones are receiving from the clavicle left and right. Then they receive influence from the neck, which is definitely incorrect. So I'm just going to zero that out. It's going to remove it. Now some of them will receive influence from left bone, from the back and shoulder. Okay, that's good. Now let's go and see how we can fix things with paint weight tool. Now I'm going to double click on the paint weight tool, double click on the icon to bring the tool, select the hard brush. You can always go to ramp to see the coloration and how you assign influence. And you can see in these areas, you can always right click and select the bone that way and tweak the influence for that bone. You can see this bone have an influence on the torso, which is a bit unrealistic. So you can always go and paint weight. My paint weight is set to replace. If I press Control, you can set it to scale, or if I press Shift, you can smooth the influence. Now I'm going to select the chest bone, and I make sure to paint the influence for those points. Then I go to back. Just going to do the same thing for the back. And I'm going to go to this guy, the shoulder, and I try to kind of smooth out the influence using the Shift key. Now you can see as soon as I do that, I receive a much better result overall. So areas are not caving in anymore. Now, one thing I can do, and I see there is a problem in here, we don't have the best deformation. One thing that I found really useful is the tool that I'm going to use, and it's called hammer weight tool. So I can select these points that I think I don't have a good deformation on, select the vertices, and just click on weight hammer tool. And you can see weight hammer tool instantly is going to fix some of these areas for us. Now weight hammer tool really averages out the neighboring vertices and the weights on them. So quite instantly we are getting good results with the weight hammer. Now I still want those small points to have a more realistic deformation. And again, if you want to just fix a few points, you can just work with the component editor and take it from there. All right, I think I'm quite happy with the amount of influence I'm getting. Always go for that natural fold. And again, the way that I do, I always have the component editor open and truly sculpt each and every point or vertex and the way they get assigned or receive influence from the surrounding bones. So this method is actually very accurate. It does take time, admittedly, but the result that you get is much better than just using paint weights. And for paint weights, I just block the weight, and then when it comes to the extra level of polish, that's how I do it. Now, do not forget to go to this guy and just get rid of the keyframes by breaking the connection. Because the last thing you want is to have keyframe on your rotate plane IK handle. Now I don't need to worry about the other side now, because I know for a fact that this works for the other side beautifully. Now I'm gonna do the same thing for the other IK handle. So the left leg, gonna press Shift W, gonna go to frame 10, probably in orthographic is much more accurate. I'm gonna go to Z and move it up. Now a lot needs to be tweaked in the shin area and in the pelvis area, so let's get to it. I found actually this shin area much easier to deal with, because you're just gonna simply select the loops and assign them to the shin bone, which is fairly straightforward, especially in the component editor. So I'm just going to select those loops. I know for a fact that they should follow the shin bone. It's just out of question. So any extra bones coming from any other bones should be removed quickly. So, and that's why component editor is just the best. You know, you select the points and you say, all right, I don't need to receive any influence from thigh or ankle. It's just shin. So I'm just going to select the first vertex value, shift select the last, and just put 1. And voila, well, we left one. So I'm just going to go and select that to shin. All right, now it's time to add a little bit of subtlety and influence subtlety in here. What I usually do, because I do find myself to select a lot of these points, and every time you select a point, it prioritizes the joint. So what I usually do, I go and say, do not select the joints for now. I would like to turn that off. So I'm just selecting with bunch of points. So I'm going to select this bunch and I'm going to go weight hammer. Voila. See, in no time at all, we managed to fix the situation. I may actually go ahead and manually tweak those areas through component editor. I didn't even use paint weight for that. So I'm going to go to component editor and I say, well, you receive some influence from shin, some influence from thigh, definitely not from ankle. So I'm going to hide this. So from shin, I'm just going to set it to 0.9 or 0.95. That is much better. And if I press 3, the result that we're getting is okay. There are a few points that I need to tweak, especially that little guy in here. It's getting really odd deformation because the value it's set to 5 for shin. Need to set it to probably 0.6. Same with this one, 0.8. That is better, and you can see how easily we just sculpt the values and get the desirable result. And let's smooth the mesh and see what we're getting. Really nice. So the natural fold is there. I just need to make sure that these areas also have a little bit of smoothness to them. So I'm just going to select the vertices, select these areas, and apply weight hammer on them. Yep, looks much better. Now again, any deformation that you see, you can just spend the time, and every minute you spend definitely worth it. Go ahead through the whole your own model and make sure there's no odd deformation. What you see should look natural. And again, with this beautiful component editor tool, you can really truly sit down and sculpt all the weights and get it exactly the way that you want to look. So the leg is done as well. I'm going to go ahead and delete the animation on it. Break the connection. Make sure not to zero out the values. It's just an old habit of mine. I always zero out values and sometimes it backfires on me. All right, so this is done. The arm is done, the leg is done, and let's have a look at the pelvis area. I can just select the IK handle again, hold down Shift W, go to frame 10, and this time we are going to target this area right here. Now what we're getting is definitely not accurate. These points should receive influence from the root bone, so that's an easy fix. You can just select those real quick and go to component editor and just say that 0.9 should receive from Oh, we forgot to select that one. 0.9 should receive from the root bone. So that's that. We can even select those guys and say 0.9 from root bone. Now with these guys, they can receive some influence from the root, some influence from the pelvis, and some influence from the shin. I'm going to select these areas, and again, the best thing to do is just to smooth out the area and then apply weight hammer, and it does its magic. So I'm going to go ahead and select these areas and just do the same thing. Now don't worry about stretching on the other side because we are going to mirror the weights, so nothing to worry about. I'm going to select the IK handle and break connections on that, so there's no keyframe on it. Let's very quickly have a look at some of these loops. So if I select this loop and select this loop, convert it to vertices and look at the component editor, technically they should receive influence from a root only, but you can see that I'm receiving influence from backbone, from the pelvis, and from thigh. So I'm just going to select the first vertex, shift select the last, and just put one in. I'm going to do the same thing for these guys. And again, it's a really fast and effective way on removing any unwanted influence on these guys. So they should only receive influence from this back joint. So I'm going to press 1 and it gets rid of the redundant influence on the others. Now let's have a look at the neck and make sure we have the same situation on the neck. So just going to select these loops. And for this one, you may want to receive some influence from the head bone. So just going to go here and look at that. It's all over the place. So we're just going to select the neck joint and shift select the last one. Press only one, so they just receive influence from the neck bone. Now for the eyes, we've already looked after it, but for the head, I'm just gonna hide the eyes and the hair geometry, select the entire head, grow my selection, and just ask the component editor to assign all of these points to only head bone. And you can see eyes are influencing it, the neck is influencing it, and the chest bone even is influencing the vertices. So you can see how easily I can just fix those problems without even using the paint weight tool. All right. Let's just very quickly have a look at the deformation and see what sort of deformation we're getting. I can bring back the eyes and the hair, go ahead and enable my selection for the bone and just rotate to see what sort of result I'm getting. And look at that. It's just excellent. At any point of time, we can just use weight hammer to soften the or smooth out the influence. So I'm just gonna select weight hammer on this loop right here. Just gonna assign weight hammer on that. That's good. How about our shoulder? Let's have a look at our shoulder, the clavicle bone. So I'm just gonna right click, go to object mode, select our shoulder bone, and just to rotate it. Beautiful. Actually quite happy with that. And last but not least, let's have a look at the foot. Now you can always go to paint weight tool and just check to make sure the influences are applied correctly. And you can see using the component editor, you really don't need to worry about anything. Everything is nicely placed in the right location. Very nice. If I select the head bone, I'm getting all the right influences. Now let's go and fix the arm. Now, it does take a little bit of time, but again, you can just go ahead with paint weight tool and paint around each knuckle, or you can just, hopefully with a good topology, you can just select these loops and you can go ahead and assign it to this bone through component editor. Now I'm going to pretty much repeat the same process for the other knuckles, and once we're done, we'll be back. Now I'm pretty much done. You can see if I right click on each bone and see the influence, you can see using component editor is really fast and efficient way of controlling the weights. I can even select the tool, select one of the bones here and go and test it out with rotate Z, enable, and see the deformation that we're getting. It's absolutely beautiful. And I left alone the middle loops. Simply they need to be a little bit smooth. So go ahead and do that for your character, and once you're back, we are going to continue. So I went back and checked the other bones as well. Didn't really find much of an error. And again, that's totally fine. If you run into any errors later on when you assign controllers to your bones, you can always go back and tweak your skins. That's no problem at all. But for the most part, I think I'm in a good place and ready to mirror my skin weights to the minus side, from the positive side to the minus side. It's actually fairly easy. The way you do it, you select the geometry and then you go to skin and you go mirror skin weights to the option box. Just going to reset the tool. The mirror across, obviously we want to mirror across. The plane is YZ and that's why it's selected. We want to go from positive to negative, so that's correct too. Closest point on surface or to surface is the method that we are going to use for surface association, and with that the influence association goes to 1 to 1. It only works if you have an identical rig and a full symmetrical model, and if you have that, definitely make use of that 1 to 1 with normalize on. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and mirror. Now the cool thing is, if I now select my paint weight tool to check the amount of influence that I'm receiving from each bone, you can already see everything looks perfect. I can select the thigh, it looks correct. I can check the foot roll, it looks correct. I can just random check one of these knuckles and looks fantastic. So that's a very quick and easy way of not to spend the time and redo the entire process for the other side, but rather mirror the influence from one side to another to speed up the process and just finalize your skin that way. All right, we're pretty much done. Congratulations, the second phase is done and been well prepared and ready for the next session, where we assign controllers and attach it to our bones and bring the character to life. Thank you very much for tuning in and hope to see you in the next video.